guys, welcome back to another video on my channel. If you're new here, welcome, and if you could be so kind to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my latest videos, that would be greatly appreciated. Today's video is going to be about my experience as a flight attendant, not to mention during COVID, why I quit so soon, and also just to give you guys insight on what to expect if you are thinking about becoming a flight attendant in the future. So to get started, I never really dreamt of being a flight attendant. A couple years ago it came across my mind, but at the time I was still in school, so I really couldn't pursue it. But it was just something I kept in the back of my mind because it's like I knew I wanted to travel. So with the flight attendant job, I was like, okay, you get paid to travel. So about a year ago prior to, I was like, I feel like I had the opportunity to pursue it. So I was like, okay, why not? You know, you get paid to travel and I want to travel, so why not try it out? So that's when I started the flight attendant job back in January of 2020. So the airline I was employed by was called Mesa Airlines, which operated under United, or operated as United Express, which is a subsidiary of United, which is the main line. So with regional airlines, the planes, they tend to be smaller, the flights are shorter, and they're usually more so just used for as connecting flights to small town cities. They usually fly into smaller airports as well if they are going into those smaller cities, and they mainly fly, well, with my company we mainly flew within the United States. We did fly out to Canada, the Bahamas, and some parts of Mexico. A lot of individuals who fly on business also would fly typically on regional flights. So Mesa Airlines operated out of 5 bases, which was Phoenix, Houston, in Dallas, and at those 3 bases they operated under American Eagle, which is the subsidiary of American, and the other 2 was Louisville, Kentucky, and in Dulles, Virginia, which was the base that I was based at, and those 2 locations operated as United Express. So getting into the job itself, so I applied back in, I believe it was between the time of August and September of 2019. I had my 3 interviews in October, and then I got offered the position in November of 2019. My life last year was just so much like go go go. I did so much domestic traveling. About 3 weeks prior to me starting my training in January, I just came fresh off of a cross-country road trip from the West Coast to the East Coast, and not to mention for my training in January I had to be back on the West Coast, and I had to train in Phoenix for a month. So it was just a lot, but I kind of liked it because I just kind of like being like on the go, like whatever. Like, I mean, I feel like in your 20s that's just like what you do, you're just on the go, fast paced. I was just kind of always used to that like traveling aspect in my life. So yeah, so training was about a month long, and the training definitely felt like I was back in school. It was a lot of study material. We had about a couple of tests per week, and not to mention we also had hands-on training. It's not like we would just learn to serve drinks. Like, I could count like one day out of my whole training, like it was focused on the customer service and like serving part of it, but a lot of the material that we had to study was just about safety protocols and what to do in an emergency, and just learning about the flight equipment and terminology. And there's a lot that I definitely can get into in depth about my training, but I'm just gonna bypass that because I just want to give like a general synopsis of my experience. So like I said, training lasted a month. The following month in February I was back at my base in Dulles. So for this particular company, and for most flight attendants, you typically tend to start out on a reserve, which means that you do not have control over your schedule of when and where you fly to. Unless you are someone that's been with the company for years, and you are someone that's high up in seniority. But again, it varies from airline to airline. So I'm going to explain what the two different types of reserves were at my company. The first type of reserve was called regular reserve. So this meant that you sat at home on call during a time period block, which was typically from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. or 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if crew scheduling, which is the people who gives us our schedule, if they called within 90 minutes, you would have to be ready to go at the airport within that 90 minutes of them calling. The second type of reserve was called ready reserve, and that meant that you had to sit at the airport, and when crew scheduling called, you had to be ready to go on a flight within 5 minutes of them calling. And also with the ready reserve, you would have to sit at the airport during a certain time block. So like I said, for the 12 hours, so it would be between like those same hours. So a pain in the ass being a reserve was, and this is definitely one of the reasons which led to me leaving the company. So reserve life, it gives you have no life outside of work. It's like you have to have your bags pretty much packed, you have to have your uniform clothes, and you're just like sitting on edge, you know, whether or not they're gonna call. And for me being on reserve, it was just very hard to plan for meals. I know a lot of the flight attendants would usually, well, a lot of the seasoned flight attendants would usually meal prep, and for me, I just wasn't used to that lifestyle yet, so, or just eating like that or prepping for that. So dieting was definitely hard during this time, and especially because it's like you don't know when, or you don't know if they're going to give you a trip, and you don't know how many days to pack for food. So it's kind of like it was a headache. And also for me, like while being on reserve, driving to work just took extra time because I lived about an hour without traffic to the airport, and with traffic it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours to get to the airport. So literally every time they would call me, I would kind of have to rush to the airport, or sometimes they would give us a notice in advance about our trips, but it still was kind of hard because, you know, our schedule would like change often and update and all that stuff. But to say if they did give us like a schedule ahead of time, like I would, in order to like just not rush and just like be easy going, like smooth going getting to the airport, I would have to probably leave like 3 hours ahead of time, and it was a lot. Now there were definitely other arrangements that I could have made which would have put me closer to the airport, and this was something called a crash pad. And y'all, I was just not about this life at all. Basically with a crash pad, a lot of the flight attendants in general living arrangements are like this because typically where a base that flight attendants fly out of may not be that flight attendant's hometown, so they would have to commute in, you know, to their base, and sometimes they wouldn't want to get a permanent residence, so they would have something called a crash pad. And basically this is you're sharing a room with 6 to 8 other roommates per room on bunk beds in either a hotel or a house. So one night I did this because I was like, I was new to everything and I just didn't know how crew scheduling was going to operate. But that one night was my last night because I was like, I won't be able to do this. And also, like, I didn't want to have to kick out an extra fee, a monthly fee to pay to live like that either. So I just decided to commute it. Now I know I mentioned before ready reserve, and I kind of want to just get back into that a little bit. So like I said before, with ready reserve you have to sit at the airport for 12 hours pretty much, or for the shift that they schedule you for, and it will be 12 hours. Now When I first started out, I was trying to be on my P's and Q's, so I definitely sat at the airport for 12 hours, and it's just not, it was just not for the faint heart. Like, you definitely have to bring something to keep you occupied. Like, I had to bring, you know, my computer, a book. Sometimes I would just walk around the airport to get some exercise, or, you know, you would talk to other flight attendants. Once I got used to everything, I definitely went around sitting at the airport for 12 hours. There was ways you could get around that, so, but I just hated it. So the first 2 months I was working normally as a reservist flight attendant would. Now around April is definitely when the trajectory of the airline industry changed because of COVID. Everyone was just in a frenzy. We had a lot of questions, and our company really couldn't give us answers because the virus was just so new at the time, and information just kept changing about what this virus was. I just remember, like, in the beginning, I think this was about like that March, April time, like we weren't allowed to wear masks. And then like transitioning into April, everyone realized, like, yes, masks are mandatory, like this virus is serious. So by this time in April, I was trying to get a voluntary leave of absence. My company was sending out those for people who wanted to take time off because of the virus, and my company, like when I applied for it, they didn't give it to me.
You think you can do this to me?
So I remember, like, I just sent them a very strong worded email about like the safety of the flight attendants, my health being a top priority, and I just felt like no one didn't care at the time. So basically they weren't trying to hear it. Their reasoning was that they couldn't give everyone that voluntary leave of absence was because that we were considered essential employees. So they needed to have people still out online. For May, I reapplied for the voluntary leave of absence, and I was granted that for May. So I took off for a month, for the month of May, and after all that, I returned back in June. I was just like so bored of sitting at home, and I was like, I figured our flights got significantly reduced, so I was like, oh, they're not gonna call me in as much. The only good thing about being on reserve was that if we didn't get called in, we still got paid. So I was like, okay, well, I might as well just go back to work if I'm just gonna be sitting here anyway, and I can just still get paid for it. So that's why I decided to go back. Yeah, I just said my prayers, and I just asked God to keep me healthy, you know, during this time, because still the virus, you know, it went from only the elderly and people with compromised immune systems, you know, could get it, but then it changed to anyone could get it. So in June, I didn't fly as much as I did back in March and April. Part of this is what I just didn't understand, why the airports were operating, and, you know, why my company was still flying. Because I remember when I came back, it was just a ghost town on our flights. Like, I remember one flight I worked, it was one person on there, and we typically carry 76 passengers, and it was one person flying, and that person was a flight attendant commuting into work. You're meaning to tell me we had more crew members working than passengers flying, and it just seemed backwards to me that we were still working. I mean, granted, yes, we were still getting paid, but it just seemed like a waste of a flight when I could just be at home, not risking myself while flying. And two, with the airports being open, it just went against everything with social distancing and just only essential travelers traveling, because none of that was going on in their airports. But I know that the reasoning that they gave, again, for the airports to stay open was for like nurses and doctors, you know, traveling from state to state, and also for like family members who wanted to be with other family members during this time, which I definitely get. But it definitely, what I've just felt like it wasn't only essential travelers traveling. June was slow, but going into July and August, flights started to pick back up a little more. And the amount of people that was coming back to fly, that started to pick up as well. So like some flights I would have like 18 people, other flights would be like 50 people. But I know during this time airlines weren't booking to full capacity, they were only booking to about 70% capacity. Now I want to move on to the type of hotels that they put us in. So I said that probably being on reserve was my first reasoning for quitting, but no, these hotels, that was definitely my first reasoning for quitting. They would put us in 2-star hotels majority of the time. I could count on 5 fingers, no, probably 3 fingers, the nice hotels that we stayed at. And mind you, as a flight attendant, you're going to pretty much different hotels each trip, but they would always give me the trips at the same hotels I hated the most. And I just could not stand it. But I'm definitely not going to get into detail about, you know, where we stayed, but just know like it was just giving 2-star creepy motel like vibes. And also too, like I just could not sleep properly in these hotels. Like I would just either wake up, toss and turn. Like I never got a proper sleep in these hotels. That was that on what to expect with hotels. I'm not sure if it's different with other airlines, but the ones they sent us to, it was just an so moving on to the type of people I worked with, being the other flight attendants. So I'm pretty much cordial with everyone and I can get along with anyone. But with me and the relationships and conversations I like to have with people tend to be back with by meaning and purposefulness, or I just like to have conversations that just don't seem forced. And if I feel like I'm forcing the conversation, then I just tend to retract. And a lot of the times this is what I felt like when flying with other, like the crew members that I worked with. A lot of the times I would work with like older pilots, and some of the flight attendants will be older, but yeah, it was just very few people I could count on one hand that I actually could say that I connected with and actually enjoyed flying with. And I've watched other vlogs previously to me becoming a flight attendant, and I remember one of the flight attendants was kind of saying the same things as me, so I know that it just wasn't me. And also thinking back to another vlog that I watched, I remember the flight attendant saying that being around so many energies, it can become draining. Because you are around different people every day, from the crew members to the passengers, and I'm definitely all for protecting my energy. So yeah, that was definitely probably another reason leading to why I left this job. Now about the passengers. Now I've heard crazy stories from, you know, and see them from social media or just from other flight attendants experiences about like passengers acting a fool towards flight attendants, and also passengers acting a fool towards each other. But I definitely say like I didn't have no crazy stories like that to tell. Now I definitely will say that I had to deal with like borderline drunk passengers and just passengers who felt entitled, but I've never had the experience where a situation had made me felt life threatened. Now I will say with being a flight attendant that you need to stay on high alert and also be the type of person to think quick on your feet, because sometimes you will have those scenarios where you have medical emergencies where someone's life could potentially be in your hands, and I thank God I didn't have any of that either. So this is probably going to be the last thing I talk about, which is the pay and the benefits. Now the pay with this company, it just wasn't enough. There was definitely no way you could expense to live on your own with this pay, unless you were flying with mainline, and because I know that they get paid way much more than regional flight attendants. And with the benefits, it was just pros and cons to it. Now people think that we get free flights but that is definitely not the case. And also too, I feel like that's kind of how like the company reels you in as well by saying free flights. But no, we as flight attendants still had to pay for our benefits, and also the people you put on your benefits also have to pay. They have to pay to get the benefits, and they also have to pay, you know, per flight as well. It was definitely a lot of loopholes in the benefits. I will say that flights was definitely significantly reduced. They were not free. And the thing about our benefits is that you are placed on standby. Now, standby is not a guaranteed seat. With standby, you have to wait until the plane is boarded to see if there are seats left over from people who may have not shown up, or if those seats just never got booked. Now with my company, I know that that we were still able to pay for a guaranteed seat at a discounted price, but I just felt that it defeated the purpose of having benefits if we just, you know, had to pay even more to be able to get a seat. So standby in my eyes makes it really difficult to travel, because it's like, again, you're on edge because you don't know if you're going to get on a flight or not. And it's like, especially for flights that you kind of like plan or trips that you plan in advance, or maybe it's like a lengthy trip or something like that, because it's like, say if you don't get on a flight the day of, it's like, you know, with hotels, you can't cancel on the day of because they will charge you. So I think that, you know, with traveling as a flight attendant on flight attendant benefits, I definitely think that it's important to get insurance on your trip. And the sad part about all of this is that I didn't even get to use my benefits. I only used them once, and that was to get from training back to home. And I know my mom had used hers once on a weekend trip, but my friends, like, they didn't even get to use theirs. And even with COVID happening, like, it just made it even more difficult to travel as well, because there was so many travel restrictions. And then when things did slowly start to become available to travel towards the ending of my time with my company, I wanted to plan for a trip to Mexico, but my company didn't even want to give me the time off for that. And I mean, I still was going to go anyway, but yeah, they didn't give me those full days off that I needed. But then too, also, like, when I was trying to book for that trip, like, standby was just a mess. Like, all the flights that we wanted kept getting booked up, and it was just very hard to be able to tell if we were going to get on a flight. We would have just had to like show up to the airport to see. But like I said, with hotels, you can't get your money back the day of, so we kind of just said F it. And yeah, that, my friends, was pretty much my last straw of being a flight attendant. So by this point, coming down to August, I was just over it. And I'm a Gemini, and when I'm over something, I'm just over it with the quickness, and I just don't look back. I just felt that with this company, they were very demanding, and then especially with the reservist, I felt like they started to overuse the reservist. One, because they gave too many voluntary leave of absences off to like people who was higher in seniority, so they really didn't have many people on reserve to work with. And it just was no time telling when I was going to get off of reserve. Now, if COVID did not happen, definitely by that time of me quitting, I definitely would have had a line, which meant control over my schedule. And I felt that if I did, it definitely would have played a part in my decision to stay longer with the company, because I probably just would have chose day trips and just called it a day. Now, the good things I will say about the flight attendant job is that it's a very easy job to do if you are the type of person who likes to be on the go, you like customer service, and you like meeting new people. It's definitely the job for you. Would I ever go back to it? I couldn't say a hard no, but I definitely will say that I feel like the travel industry will have to go back to a somewhat normalcy And I also probably would choose to do a mainline airline, which probably I would like to do Delta, because again, like I said, like mainline flight attendants, they get paid way more. But one thing I will say about Mesa in particular, and with the benefits, was that because they operated as two different airlines, being American Eagle and United Express, our benefits, we got to have both of American and United's benefits. So I will definitely say that was a good thing about working with the company. And also too, with one of their bases being close to my hometown, that was definitely a plus for me. And I will also say that I did make a good friend out of training, so stuff like that is what really goes a long way, and also what really matters as well. So yeah guys, that is another look into my journey navigating through these 20s. Like I said in my other videos, a roller coaster ride for sure. And if you guys haven't checked out my other videos, please go back and do so. If anyone has any other questions about my flight attendant experience, please leave a comment down below. And also please do not forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys in my next one.